So, hi and welcome to this week's episode of Tales of Logistics. And this week we have an expert in warehouse management, transport management system. He's been in the system for a very long time, and it's a pleasure having Mr. Hedge on our studio today. Good morning and welcome, Mr. Deepak.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
I'm very fine. So this morning we're talking about the struggles that operations team have when they're using management system, probably for warehousing or transportation, or even ERP. Now, I have a couple of questions I want to ask, and these are questions that will benefit professionals in the industry, probably help them make better decisions, help them look for something that will aid and optimize their operations as well. All right, so the first question I have is, in the industry, we have a lot of siloed database, spreadsheets, dashboards, and these are something that professionals use a lot, even when they have structured software system, like warehouse management system, transport management system, or ERP. My first question is, why do we have professionals who have siloed databases so scattered everywhere?
So you talked about WMS, TMS, and ERP, right? So WMS has a specific workflows, several workflows and it does a great job of it, right? And TMS has its own transportation-related workflows. ERP is for finance and billing and cost and management and so on. So each of them do a great job in their own silos.
True.
But what happens typically is when you have to interconnect them together, not physically interconnect, but in terms of your mental map or the mental
map, correct, yeah.
So when you have to think about order in and order out for a 3PL kind of a situation, right? So orders are coming in from multiple systems, multiple customers, right? So they often ask these 3PL providers to use their systems as opposed to internal systems, right? But then they need to also track those orders internally. So what happens is when you have to manage across multiple systems or multiple customers or even multiple vendors on the delivery side, you end up having multiple silos, right? Whether you like it or not, you may want a unified view and throw money at it. You can build an ERP system, yet certain things are not under your control, right?
Yeah.
So that is what causes these silos. And people look at data differently. Each of them have their own lens. So operations manager might have their own lens, and the person who is in inbound or outbound may have their own lens in which they look at the data, right? So it can be anything. It may be just invoice, it may be just orders, it may be deliveries, it may be cash on delivery, and so on, right? So the reconciliation need becomes much more when you have these disconnected systems.
Yeah.
And that's why I think these disconnected dashboards often give pain to the operations.
Now, speaking about pain, at what point does this lots of database of information become a liability to the operations team? Because you've mentioned several dashboards and the volume sometimes where you have to mentally map, okay, I have to go to this dashboard. There's a time consumption in that process. At what point does this lots of data become a liability to the team?
Yeah, so I would say it depends on the scale, right? As people scale, or if they have to deal with demand, which is quite different on a daily basis, or sudden there is a peak demand, or there is a manpower challenge because of which they need to rework certain things. None of these are predictable and they cannot be codified in these WMS or TMS systems. So you ought to have your own standard operating procedures. You ought to have your own way of combining that data into your own Excel sheets and things like that. So hence, it's a scale problem, right? Approving tens of invoices versus hundreds of invoices, cost or revenue impact based on human errors, right? Or productivity issues. All of these happen as people start scaling, as people start delegating, as people start hiring new people or some people leave and so on. It's a very dynamic environment. And that's when it's a pain. And the people start to think, instead of saying, I think we should, which is from the gut, they say, data says so, hence we should. That's when people have that mindset shift and say, okay, let me look at the data and let me make some decisions from the data across these silos.
No, you talked about scale, you talked about recruitment and change of employees. And that's something that really affects operations a lot. And I'm just thinking in a situation where a team have several dashboards and several spreadsheets. And now a member of that team is gone. Now they've recruited somebody else. So they have to train that person through those dashboards while doing their jobs. What is the financial or operational cost as an experienced expert to a team like that?
I think it definitely depends. And I was speaking to one of our customers, and they were just purely talking about what's the typical training plan. They will have a 1 day of classroom training and then
Correct.
subsequently 3 days of on the floor training. This is just for people who are laborers who are doing the job. But the people who have more systems, it becomes much more complex because there are so many different standard operating procedures that individual companies have, and they expect certain data in certain format for them to for the operations to run, and it becomes quite a challenging job. And I would think it's of the order of 4 to 6 weeks before they start to get a good grasp of how the systems work and what is expected of them, and how do we present that to the executives and so on.
Yeah, because I think I've had the experience before in my previous company where we had zero dashboards. And that brings me back to my next question when it comes to struggling. Since it is difficult for companies or teams to train people consistently, but does not make it difficult for these members of this team to precisely and confidently translate the data that they see into action?
Yeah, just before I answer that, let me go back to the previous one, just to elaborate that a bit. In terms of the time taken, it's not just about learning these dashboards, right? It's about inferring these dashboards and being able to get into the shoes of these tribal knowledge that existed because of a lot of experienced people around. I need to, even though I know logistics, let's say I know operations, I know how to do things, but every company is different. Each of them, there are nuances. To understand the chart, somebody has to have that analytical thought process, right?
Correct.
To understand it in the way that is required. And that's where the AI does wonders now, right? Because it can draw inferences from these charts, and it can align the data and make the data speak to you, essentially to help you make decisions. So that's the advantage of that. Even if the companies are small, they should look at how to leapfrog now, because the bar is lowered from the standpoint of cost as well, even for the small and medium companies now. And that's why I think there is definitely an opportunity for these companies to excel from the operation standpoint.
So what you just said brings me to two other auxiliary questions. The first one is, what can AI mean? You're an expert in artificial intelligence and its implication in how it helps operations. So what can AI do with this problem that we have, where there's a time consumption, there's a financial cost in switching and looking at data? Sometimes even when you go on leave and return from your leave, you almost feel like you've forgotten how to switch. So what, as an expert, what can artificial intelligence, or what has artificial intelligence done to optimize this situation?
Yeah, excellent question. So let me draw a parallel here, right? Let's say there is an operations person, and that person has a job to be done.
Correct.
So without AI, let's say there are few things that the person does, and there is an expected outcome from that job to be done. And this is all we don't think so much about all of these. It exists in humans. We just learn on the fly and on the job, and without understanding the nuances of this, we would be doing all of this, right?
Yeah.
There is a job to be done. We would just go and do it, and we will infer so many things along the way, and then subsequently come up with an expected outcome. What AI can do is to, like you said, there are multiple dashboards. The first job is to reconcile them. Reconcile the data. Ensure that it's not like you take all the data and reconcile everything and do some magic. No, I don't think we should look at AI from that angle. We should divide the problem into a very specific problem for that persona or that person who's doing that job or workflow. How do we transform the whole job to be done into an expected outcome? So now, like you said, there are 3 or 4 dashboards. You download the report from one screen and the second screen and the third one. You ensure that the order ID is matching with the delivery ID.
Exactly.
The manifest and so on, right? So there is a mistake in the number that is received here, or invoice says 32 and here it says 35, right? So that's what you do, reconciling. And like you said, when you come back from vacation, especially, it becomes mind-boggling because, it's very hard to be able to put those together, number one. It's prone to human errors. Anyone, even though that person may be an expert. It depends on our frame of mind, a lot of other things going on in our heads. And the second is to come up with that expected outcome. Because if it just reconciled the data, it did not really accomplish what that person accomplished.
Yeah.
Right? So the way in which we look at AI is it has to reconcile, strive to get the expected outcome, and it has to be presented in this format that the person can consume. It could be simple as insights and recommendations. It could be another Excel that provides the unified view of what that person wants to make decision on. And there are very specific things. For example, let's take an example of an SLA breach.
Yeah.
If there is an SLA breach, where did the real issue happen? Is it in the carrier? Is it in internal ops? Is it in delivery side? Where? And there is a contract between the company and the customer saying these SLA breaches are genuine and these are not. So certain things have penalty and certain things don't. And we need to be able to say which one have penalty and which ones can be disputed. Even though there is an SLA breach, this does not correspond to a penalty. So you need to get to that level of decisioning with the systems that we're talking about. Only then it becomes very effective. Did I answer your question?
Yes. Why then do we have companies struggling or finding it a bit difficult to adopt artificial intelligence if it will truly help them run a smoother operation?
I think the primary issue is just people are trying to do too many things. They are bogged down by the complexity, which is rightly so. When you look at the problem, when you look at an operation which involves like several vendors have their own order management system, and then you have a warehouse management system, and then there are delivery apps that are independent. And when you look at this and say, I want to use AI, I mean, where do you want to use AI? How is it going to give you value? But when you take the problem and say, okay, there is a persona, this persona is spending 2 hours a day when he compiles the data and then provides the report. How do I improve the experience of this person? You start looking at, when you divide this problem into a smaller problem, then there is a much better chance of success. Otherwise, most of these enterprises are expecting huge benefits and they think, you can throw everything at it and then it just does magic. It's not going to do any magic. So it's very important for enterprises to get the deterministic output. It's not okay to get, some insights in the morning and some other completely different insights in the evening. Right? So I need to see the determinism in this entire thing. That's when it becomes effective. So it is not like you just use AI and just expect AI to do the magic, but you have to sprinkle the AI in the right place to be able to really get the value out of it.
Okay. And you also mentioned the unrealistic expectation
you
have on artificial intelligence. So that brings me to your company, ValueZen.
Yeah.
What problem in all of these we've discussed in warehouse management systems, several dashboards, and database is your team trying to fix?
Right. So we do several things. Like I said, we have AI stack, right? So we have what is called as ontology, which has different layers, physics layers, metrics layers, and then persona, and then objectives, and so on. So that sort of gives the power for us to do certain things that I was talking about, and also the root cause analysis. And then the agentic AI, which everybody is talking about, which is essentially just doing reconciliation, does involve several steps. So you got to make sure unit economics is good. You can't just throw the data to AI and expect it to make decisions, right? So you have to be able to look at the data and then apply right algorithm to be able to reconcile the data, number one. Number two, bring out the insights. And if there are certain algorithms for prediction, let's say, for example, one of the customers wanted manpower prediction for the subsequent week. We took the patterns, absenteeism patterns, the streak absences, the absences around Sundays. So several factors when you talk about 200 to 400 people in a warehouse, 15 different warehouses and 3 different shifts. And there are people from inbound picking, packing, as well as the security and janitors and everything, right? They got to plan that roster, right? So to be able to plan that for the subsequent week to achieve the fill rate that they expected to achieve, right? So we have to predict. And that's the thing that they do manually today, right? So they do the major planning in a week, and then every day they refresh their plans and so on and so forth. And they would take, 30, 40 minutes or sometimes 2 hours once in a week, etc. And you can do it in like few minutes. Now you can schedule that data reconciler and just it sends you a report, and it also has a nice dashboard which you can use to get the recommendations for the subsequent week. That's one type of a problem statement. And I talked about the AI stack, a platform where you could train your own reconciler. Let's say, for example, you want to reconcile the other problem statement that we worked on was the carrier invoice reconciliation. And so when you have, let's say, for example, you have brand's invoice, product is shipped to the retailers through a warehouse, etc. There is a manifest, there is product invoice, there is a retailer invoice, and then the carrier's invoice doesn't get paid because there is one discrepancy and it doesn't match the POD, which is the proof of delivery. So now how do you address that, right? So there is so much of reconciliation that is needed. And subsequently, you need to come to a decision that is useful or valuable to the person, right? And the decision would be, is this within the norms? Can you approve that? Or where was the real problem? Where did it originate? POD says this and this says that. These two are matching. This is not matching. Hence, this is the problem. So you want to be able to arrive at that information. So the process, the way it works in our platform is number one, we train the model based on the Excel files. We train based on the specific instruction. I talked about job to be done and expected outcome. You provide that. And once you provide that, more specific information you provide, you would get a better result. So if you, for example, need a specific result, we can intervene as a professional service and we can fine tune the AI model to be able to give you that deterministic output. And once it is trained, you're going to get the same thing. You can schedule it on a daily basis. It'll simply pick the files from a Google Drive or someplace, and it'll reconcile and it'll send you an email out saying, look, this is the output, which is an Excel sheet again, if you want it. And then there are some insights and recommendations and so on. And if you want to come back to our platform and see it, you will get some beautiful visualization of what those outputs are. So this is a platform, yes, it can be trained to various different reconciliation use cases. As I said, the problem has to be small first. It has to be solved at the workflow level. And then you help them come up with a micro decision and save their time and reduce errors.
So in terms of practicality now, what problem can artificial intelligence in your field, your brand of artificial intelligence, what problem can it solve? You give us a case scenario, the industry, the problem, then the solution.
So one I mentioned is invoice reconciliation as one of the problems, right? Some of the other ones are choice compliance for fleets, right? The hours of service. Sometimes there is a compliance issues in hours of service of the drivers, and hence you want to be able to predict that. You want to be able to say, look, if you assign this driver to this trip, there is a potential for compliance errors, compliance issues. Let's say in a fleet operations, the data comes from multiple places and they won't necessarily match all the time. And there was going to be discrepancies. And it takes a while for you to react to that. That would cause implications with respect to compliance, revenue leakage, rate contract versus the actual, essentially causing revenue leakage and so on.
Correct.
That's another problem. So there are so many such scenarios, and there were certain issues that we tried to solve when it was related to put away. Right, the item was put in a different bin, and it caused people to think that the item is not arrived. And when there are tens of thousands of product SKUs, you cannot do that at the pace that software would do. You would do a random check, and you would identify that maybe there is this error, and this would be quite random. It wouldn't be like a continuous thing. And in our case, currently we are working on that problem statement where we could make that more sophisticated and be able to identify where the real problem arose and then arrive at the insights and foresights for better decision making.
Does such optimization software like this that has artificial intelligence to aid smoothly the operation department or team, does not become as a threat to jobs, to people's jobs? Because the truth is many people are still concerned about if we introduce artificial intelligence, we've got people who's got families, they've got expenses. Does introducing a software that does exactly what you just mentioned not threaten jobs in these warehouses or companies?
If you look at the history, automation, people thought people will lose jobs, right?
Yeah.
So when you looked at, even before that, there were a lot of things that were done on paper. And before these platforms came in, WMS, TMS, etc., people started using those platforms and sort of delegated the grunt work to the platform, and they did more sophisticated work. So it's the next evolution at this stage. Yes, the shift is huge for sure, but then human in the loop cannot be avoided because accountability lies with the human, right? You can automate stuff. You could ensure that the things are done in a much smoother manner, but you have to take the accountability for the decisions you make. So ultimately, it is an assist, and we have to accept that things are going to change. The nature of jobs are going to change to some extent. Like someone said, the people who do not use AI will be replaced by the people who use AI, right? We cannot necessarily sit back and say, no, I'm not going to change the way that I do things. You will have to accept it. But then it's going to make your life better because there is going to be more and more interesting things that is possible by humans. And what is also happening because of AI is the customer expectations are increasing. Now, if the customer expectation was here and you did the great job and customer expectation went there,
Yeah.
there's no additional headcount. Guess what? I mean, you have to get there, which means you will continue to do the job, but you have to take the help of AI to improve your productivity. Right? So that's, I think, is a big shift in, that some people keep talking about it, saying, has AI reduced the amount of time you spend on work? Has it given you the work-life balance?
Yeah.
He says, no way. I mean, it has only increased the amount of work that I'm
Yeah.
doing because the expectation of the customers is magic. And without using AI, you cannot create magic. And guess who uses AI? Humans. So humans need
Yeah.
to exist.
So what will be your advice or your piece of advice for entrepreneurs, operations heads, department heads who are kind of dragging their feet on adopting artificial intelligence into their operations? What are your pieces of advice for them?
Yeah, I think, I was pleasantly surprised when I spoke to a few people. Everyone was looking for, where should I use AI? At least the leadership level, right?
Yes.
So they were continuously in search of the right problem statement to use AI, right? And the people who are bogged down by the manual work, they definitely don't have time to think about how do I leverage AI today? Because especially in logistics, it's a very, very strenuous, physically strenuous as well, not just mentally strenuous, right? So because of that, they are bogged down by the amount of things that they need to do. It may not be really dragging their feet, but just that they do not have the time and the mind space to think about it. But definitely, if you are able to narrow the scope and say, this is where I spend X amount of time, daily basis, how can I automate this, right? How do I make myself, freer, right? And focus on what I can do things better on, right? That kind of a mentality would make people try certain tools. A lot of people have built their own macro in Excels, right? So I'm sure there are people who are constantly thinking about how do I use AI, right?
Yeah, true.
Now, my piece of advice is, explore. Just don't be scared to explore because it's just and AI is very, very easy from that perspective in terms of, even if you go to ChatGPT or Claude or anything of that sort, you can at least get something out of it. That's where we come in. We make that deterministic. So I think would love to talk to those people who would be interested to debate and discuss.
Another challenge that I've come to learn from entrepreneurs, mainly those in the emerging markets, where you have infrastructure problem, because some of them believe that artificial intelligence goes with internet and with good infrastructure, mainly internet. And so they usually ask, what if we do not have internet accessibility or there's a particular infrastructure that is needed for the smooth operation? So that's why they tend to usually stick with lots of hands and human experience. Again, what is your piece of advice for such people or such entrepreneurs in that kind of market? Because we have a huge emerging markets in Asia, in Africa, And one of the biggest challenge there is stability of internet services. And when I discuss with them at times, or with some of them, that's their concern. It's not just expensive, it's they cannot guarantee stability. And when you talk about artificial intelligence, it most often goes with internet services. So what's your piece of advice for such big companies in the industry?
Yeah, I think the first thing is the system has to be resilient for errors, right? And the second thing is you schedule what you want to accomplish. Logistics is a domain where you can't expect intervention in these kind of scenarios. The humans have to be there to be able to move stuff, right? But then when errors happen, or when things don't go as planned, which is most of the cases, most of the scenarios, that's when the amount of time people spend to get back on track is huge.
It's huge.
So
True.
now that happens if you look at it in a sort of a periodic manner, right? You don't need to be always cross-checking, checking, and so on and so forth, right? You check on an hourly basis, or 2 hours, or 6 hours, and so on. So when you have such, then you could definitely schedule your AI agents to do the job on the background, and you finish your job, you come back and cross-check and move on, right? And if that is resilient enough, you will get the output, even though there are intermittent connectivity issues.
Cool. So this is the last question, I promise you. When we started recording this episode, we talked about the challenges that operations team have, different dashboards, different spreadsheets, and database. And now we've come from the challenge to the solution. So in summary, what should operations team do when they are faced with dashboards that are scattered, that consumes not just time, leads to mental fatigue, but also costs money?
First thing they should do is to experiment, because when they don't know who to reach out to, right, they should just simply experiment to be able to see what can AI do. And experimentation today is not that difficult, because you have access to AI tools. You can just throw your downloaded Excels and try and see what it gives and things like that, to be able to see what can AI do. That's number one, right? And number two is to look for entrepreneurs who are trying to solve these problems in the logistics space, because they have been thinking about it, talking to several people. They're trying to figure out, and even entrepreneurs need help of logistics domain experts, because we need to learn from them as to what are the nuances from which they come from and what is valuable to them as opposed to just stuff. So it's a two-way street from that angle, right? So it is important to reach out, and we obviously reach out to a lot of logistics providers, and at the same time, it would be good to do the other way around as well. And third is to, like I said, to narrow the problem, a point where it is going to give you the most value. What are the top two challenges that you have operationally, right? How do you, and what is the impact of it? Is it costing you thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, delay in payments? Is it costing you hours and hours? And I call it like when leaders' anxiety hits the fan, the chaos happens. So I think it's important for people to keep an eye on that, and then narrow the problem and try and solve smaller problem first, and then chain them to and solve a bigger problem later. So I think that's the best way to go about it, I feel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deepak Hedge. Again, Mr. Deepak Hedge is the CEO, founder of ValueZen.ai, and it's fantastic having him here on our episode today. We've talked a lot of things that benefits professionals in developed world, and then he also answered questions on companies that are in emerging markets that have infrastructure problem or downtime, what they should do, and what operations team should do if they are faced with several dashboards, database, and spreadsheets. We thank you so much, Mr. Deepak Hedge, for this meeting. And so we're really grateful that you took your time to come online and help us answer these questions that bother a lot of professionals. And the people who will be listening to you can definitely benefit a lot and will put into practice all that you've talked about today. Thank you once more, Mr. Deepak Hedge.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. And I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you very much. So that's how we wrap up our episode this week, and see you guys next week in our next episode. Voila.
Thank you.